Can I ask you a quick question? In the segregated South, buses were separated, black people in the back, white in the front. Where do you think the Asians sat? My grandma Pearl, she moved with her family to Augusta, Georgia in 1927, where they ran a grocery store in the black neighborhood. What did it mean to grow up Chinese in a black and white space?
Now, when I was growing up, the expression, we had a Chinese grocery store on every corner. You know, the laws at that time were so limited, but not applying to the Chinese.
Segregation was nothing more than a pseudo way of carrying on slavery.
How did they end up in the black neighborhood?
They are still people of color. Can only go so high.
They were allowed to go to the predominantly white schools, whereas blacks were not allowed to go to the predominantly white schools.
And at school, they were mostly white kids. Did you feel?
All white kids.
How did that make you feel?
No mingling at all.
The Chinese, you know, there's some of them that they don't want nothing to do with the blacks, but yet they want their money, you know.
They played the blacks against the Chinese like the Chinese were a little better than the blacks and the whites was a little better than the Chinese. That's the way it went.
The black people in Augusta are tired of being told that there is no racial problem here. Now the nation knows that Augusta has a problem.
Why then during the riots did the black community take on the Chinese community and destroy the stores? Were they too close to Caucasians and too far from the blacks?
How are we going to move forward if we don't address the past?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Breeze, Breezeway Productions' The Breeze, where we bring you the latest in independent films and film festival news. And we're happy to continue our coverage of this year's Harlem Film Festival, the 2022 edition, with the film Blurring the Color Line. And we have with us today director Crystal Kwok. How are you?
Hi, nice to meet you, Alex.
Nice to meet you as well, and thank you for coming on the show. Tell us a bit about the film Blurring the Color Line, which is at the festival this year.
So basically, in a nutshell, it follows my journey in trying to explore the racial dynamics between the Chinese community and the Black community during segregation, Jim Crow specifically, in Augusta, Georgia, where my grandmother's from. So that's kind of a nutshell of what it's all about.
Right on. I thought that it was very informative. I didn't know a lot about the history of that community down in the South. So tell me a little bit more about how you started this journey towards creating this project.
Right. So as I mentioned, my grandmother's from Augusta, Georgia, and she ran away when she was 17 and ended up in San Francisco, which is why I was born and grew up here. And she had this pretty thick Southern accent, and I never really knew because she never told us about her stories. And I started to dig, and I was close to my grandmother, so she would tell me things that she had done. And because they ran a grocery store, it was an interesting space for me to explore, because it was it's a fixed space, and it was a space of encounters, and it was very specifically a space between the Chinese storekeepers and the Black customers, because their store was in the Black neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So these dynamics got me thinking about a lot of things, and I realized I didn't know much about our racial history other than the surface level of slave history under Black history, and then Asian American history seems to be separated from Black history. So I thought, wow, okay, but there's some connection going on here. And I was determined to find a way to connect the two, because this really, the story, the actual location, and the fact that this family and many families, Chinese families, were thriving in this Black neighborhood that nobody knew about. Nobody knows about the Chinese in the South, first of all. And then, what are the complexities of it? What brought them there? And what were the relationships between the Chinese and the Black community, which speaks to today's racial tensions, I have to say. So it's kind of gone full circle, and starting with a very personal story from my grandmother's growing up, to addressing these bigger issues that are kind of revealing the larger racial problems we are experiencing today.
Yeah, you did a lot of man on the street interviews when you were asking people, do they know about this history or what they thought about it? Some people of African American descent or Asian American descent. Like, what do you think happened in the South during that time? A lot of people didn't even know. One that stuck out was where do you think they sat on the bus when you asked the bus driver? And she was like, I don't know, the front. I don't know, because of the skin tone. Is that how it worked? It's like people have absolutely no idea. So I think that the film itself is very illuminating to something that history books don't really talk about that much. So I thought that that was interesting to learn. You also revisited a lot of the places, or one of the places that's down south that's still around, and they talked about the grocery store was just passed down through families, and the one that's still left in the neighborhood. So when you brought this subject to them, did they feel very I don't know, warmly receiving that you're covering this type of topic?
You know, that's an interesting question because I would have thought I'd be more warmly received on the Chinese side than the African American side. But when I started doing these interviews, it was like the Black community was much more eager to tell their stories, their memories. Of course, the Chinese community, some of them did, but they felt like, well, my sense was that why am I telling their private stories? Why am I digging into a place where I didn't grow up? And how are you treating this kind of thing? They were a little skeptical of what I was trying to do. Because, you know, I had to say, Chinese, we think collectively. And a lot of times it's like, well, if you're going to tell a story about our people, we need to tell the success stories, not dig into these uncomfortable spaces, particularly through the women's lenses. And so I'm like digging into these women and how they remember them, their kind of past, sneaking out on dates with white boys, or what the interracial marriages meant to the family. So we're digging into things that they don't want to expose. So that, yeah.
So they're painting the picture of the history that they would see fit, with only the good stuff, not the bad stuff, not to just tell the entire story.
Yeah,
Well,
I think a lot of ethnic communities do that because we want to kind of get up there, and it speaks to the color line because it's like, where do we sit? All these different marginal communities all over, it doesn't have to be Chinese, any non-Black or whites or any mixtures of people, we're kind of in this blurry middle. And sometimes there is this real effort on behalf of particularly the immigrant generation to make that kind of model minority image, which is very deceiving.
Yes, I understand. But it did not come across that way. You told the story the way that the story was told, for the good times and the bad, to get a well-rounded view of the history of what happened with Asian Americans in the South. And my next question is about the people that you worked with to help create this vision that you had to make this film. Who are the people that you'd like to give a shout out to for helping move this project along and then to create it as it is done today?
Yes. Well, I just want to say, first of all, like a lot of filmmakers, you start from yourself and you painfully kind of plow through as much as you can until something happens. So when, first of all, Black Lives Matter happened, and which shifted my narrative quite a bit. And then shortly after, the anti-Asian hate crimes started. And so the way to address these issues really informed my film. And so at that point, I was looking for somebody who really was kind of a part of that. And that's where my editor gave me the idea. Like there's Daniel Wu is my main executive producer, who is he was a famous actor in Hong Kong. He's still quite famous now for Chinese Chinese audience. But anyway, so he was active in the anti-Asian protests and all that. So he was very visible, and he thought my film was important to address these kind of uncomfortable spaces, even within the Chinese community, to address anti-Blackness, because we don't talk about that. I don't know anyone who's talked about that. And so we said, okay, well, we need to do this. And then because of his contacts, he brought on board Lisa Ling and Kamal Bell, which was amazing because they are both activists, very strong activists in bridging these communities and actively talking about race relations, is what we need to do. So that's, you know, this film was really kind of I'm very grateful for them on board.
Right on. Yeah. And it was very informative. As I said, I think you did a wonderful job creating this documentary. Blurring the Color Line, which screened at the Harlem Film Festival this year. Is there anything you'd like to say to the Harlem Film Festival for the official selection this year?
Yes. Well, first of all, it was so significant to be in a space like this because it's a historical space, right? And the fact that they accepted my film represents the recognition of blurring and blending and bridging these communities. Why is a story, for me being Asian American, going into a Black film festival, right? Where's the connection? So people need to recognize that is the bridge, and that we need to open up where things are connected, that our histories are intertwined, and a lot of people don't know it. And that's the beautiful thing. Once we get it out there, then people can start questioning their pre-existing notions of these Black and white spaces and go, wow, yeah, so maybe this will help us address going forward these tensions by looking at our past and looking at the wonderful things and how we were connected and the uncomfortable things. But that's why this space at Harlem was so special to me, because
Nice.
they recognized the power of this narrative.
Yeah, it definitely was powerful and informative and educational and enjoyable. So all of those
Thank
things
you.
rolled into one is a nice package for a film. Where can people go to check out more about blurring the color line? Like a website, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, things like that?
Yeah, the best thing is to go into our website because we have all the updates, and it's www.blurringthecolorline.com. You can sign up for our newsletter there, and we will be engaging in a lot of impact events to open up discussion, because it's all about the discussions after the film. It's we want to shift things, we want to make change. So this is where we are at, and thank you for the space for letting me share my film.
This is great. No, I think that it was awesome, and we're going to showcase the links down below. So I want to thank you for joining me today, Crystal Kwok, to talk about your film Blurring the Color Line, which just screened at the Harlem Film Festival, and we hope our audiences are able to check it out.
Thank you.